Good afternoon, and welcome to Washington State University's 2022 State of the University Address. I'm Sandra Haynes, and I'm the Chancellor at WSU Tri-Cities. I'm pleased to be here to be able to host WSU System President Kirk Schulz here on the Tri-Cities campus as he makes his presentation from our new building, Collaboration Hall. Our 40,000 square foot, that would have been bad. Our 40,000 square foot Collaboration Hall opened in September and houses a suite of teaching laboratories, classrooms, study spaces, and collaborative meeting spaces for students and faculty and for the community. It is the first state-funded building on the Tri-Cities campus in more than 30 years, and we are delighted to have it. Before we get started, let me share a little bit more about WSU Tri-Cities. We were established in 1989 along the beautiful banks of the Columbia River here in Richland, Washington. On this campus, our scholarship and research focus primarily on energy, environment, and agriculture. We are home to the Bioproduct Sciences and Engineering Laboratory and the Chateau Ste. Michelle Wine Estates WSU Wine Science Center. The WSU Tri-Cities campus also helps to maintain several joint institutes with Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. These institutes focus on nuclear science, advanced power grid technologies, and bioproducts. More than 40% of our students at WSU Tri-Cities are first-generation college students, and nearly half of our student body comes from diverse backgrounds. In fact, WSU Tri-Cities is the most diverse campus in the Washington State University system. In a moment, President Schulz will join us to deliver his remarks. Following his address, Anna McLeod, Chair of the Administrative Professional Advisory Council, and Doug Call, Chair of the Faculty Senate, will moderate a question and answer session with the President. They will be asking some of the many questions that have been submitted in advance by WSU students, faculty, staff members, and alumni. Anna and Doug, thank you for joining us via Zoom today. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce WSU System President Kirk Schulz.
Well, everybody out there, thank you for joining us today for the 2022 State of the University Address. We really appreciate those of you who are joining today right now. And for those of you who maybe are going to watch this on YouTube at a different time with your favorite adult beverage. Really pleased for the 2022 State of the University Address to be doing this from the Tri-Cities campus. This represents the first time during my presidential tenure that we've done a State of the University Address outside of the WSU Pullman campus. So I think it's just great to be doing this in Collaboration Hall. And if you have not had an opportunity to see Collaboration Hall, I welcome you anytime you're in the Tri-Cities area, come by and take a look at our newest building. I also, let's see, what slide are we on? Let's go to slide 2, please. I want to acknowledge that WSU Tri-Cities is located on shared traditional homelands of the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation and the Confederated Tribes and Bands of the Yakama Nation. I also want to take this opportunity to congratulate our men's and women's basketball teams. Generally in March, over the last few years, maybe we hadn't been part of March Madness as women's and men's basketball. This year, it's really exciting. Our women's basketball team with Coach Cammie Etheridge made the NCAA tournament for the third time in our university history, second year in a row. Really, really proud of that accomplishment, what I think is the toughest women's basketball conference in the country. And then our men are in the third round of the NIT. They play BYU tomorrow night for an opportunity to go to Madison Square Gardens for the Final Four of the men's NIT. So congratulations to Kyle Smith and our men's basketball team as well. Also, special thanks to Anna and Doug. Look forward to our Q&A session. And just so everybody knows, today what we're going to do is I'm just going to do a few slides that hit some big, broad topics that I want to focus on. And then what we're going to do is spend the majority of our time in a multitude of questions that people submitted from our faculty staff in advance. And I want to make sure that we give ourselves plenty of time to go through those particular questions. I also want to acknowledge I tend to be an optimist at heart and always look forward to the future and think the future is going to be better than the past. But I want to acknowledge that the last 2 years have been really, really challenging for the WSU community. I went into higher education because I loved working with students, with faculty, being around our campuses, because they just have a vibrancy to them with people present. As much as Zoom was helpful and as much as I appreciate our faculty and staff and the way they pivoted, it just isn't quite the same. And so there's this little bit of a sense of loss, I think, over the last 2 years about some of the things that we're just used to doing that we weren't able to do. I also appreciate the way our university community has responded to these ever-changing sets of rules and regulations. And I certainly know there's been frustration with me as president, our leadership team, where it seems like every few months there's something different going on with COVID or a different rule or different regulation. I've been really proud of our campus communities across the state, the way that you all have responded, and the way that I think we tried to focus on making sure that we provide that in-person opportunities for our students. Next slide, please. It's certainly, let's go to back one. Okay, it's been a time of transition for WSU. And this last year on January 1st, we really celebrated Elizabeth Chilton serving as our first ever WSU Pullman Chancellor. Elizabeth came to us nearly 2 years ago as provost, and I really appreciate her taking on this additional role. I think it's time for WSU to really take this particular step and recognize that we are a set of interconnected campus locations across the state of Washington. And I think the recognition of Pullman having its own chancellor, its own strategic plan, as part of a larger system is really a necessary step for us. So what am I going to be spending my time doing? Really 3 areas that I want to be able to focus some efforts on. The first is around strategic planning and really thinking about where can we take the WSU system in the future. The second thing is really to engage us more fully, our leadership team and others, in policy issues related to public higher education in the state of Washington and the nation as a whole. So that means more time in Washington, D.C., more time in Olympia, working with our elected officials, both at the national and the state and local and regional level. And then finally, we're in the first year of a 10-year fundraising campaign. And that means I have an opportunity to go out and visit Cougs and people that have an affiliation with our university, not just in the state of Washington, but around the country, and talk to them about the great ideas that come from you all as faculty, staff, and students, and that they have the financial resources to assist us in doing the kind of things that we feel that we need to do. So I look forward to the challenges of maybe being on the road a little bit more, but representing and leading this great institution into our next phase of being Washington's land-grant university. Next slide. We've certainly had a lot of challenges throughout the pandemic, and I'm going to list a few of them here. All of you at home could probably say, well, Kirk, you got a few of them, but here's a bunch more. Let me just kind of highlight some of the things that I think have been, certainly for the last year, but probably the last 2 years, really been at the forefront of the way we've had to work. First,
we've had to be more flexible in the way that we work, in the workplace, and the way that we teach. I was probably that traditional generation that kind of felt, hey, if you're at work, that means you're in the office. And if you're not in the office, that means you're not necessarily working. And I think it's a good thing for us is that coming out of this pandemic, we recognize the workplace has got to be more flexible. As I travel around the state, if I got my backpack, my laptop, and an internet connection, I feel I can pretty much work from anywhere. Many of you are in the same position. And with that flexibility in the workplace, that's already there, I think is going to continue to be important for us moving forward. So we have to re-examine the ways that we work. Second, we're a nearly $400 million a year research operation across all of our campuses. And many people had significant impacts to their research efforts during the pandemic time, especially during that first year. And for those of many of you as faculty and graduate students found creative ways to keep that scholarly work going, and I commend you for that. But it's hard enough to do that work and to meet those requirements that you have from either a funding sponsor or a student finishing in a timely fashion. And just having that pandemic, shutting that stuff down has been really a challenge to many of you. The mental and physical wellness of our faculty, staff, and students has also been one of the challenges. I think a lot of it was actually there pre-COVID. We just maybe didn't recognize it to the same amount. And the good thing is, it's now much more highly visible, and it's something I want to talk about a little bit later about the steps that we're going to be taking to make sure that we're assisting all of the people associated with WSU in their mental health and their physical well-being. We had been working with a computer system for finance and for operations that was written in the 1970s. I'm a big fan of books written in the 70s and movies from the 70s. Maybe not the computer technology of the 70s. And so one of the things that I think is really that we had planned for 4 years to do was the Workday implementation. Now, most of the time you would say, well, Kirk, that's going to be really difficult to do well as an institution, and I'm proud of how we did it, but you wouldn't try and do it in the middle of a global pandemic. But we did, and we pulled it off. And so many of you that are looking at this associated with all of our campuses, faculty and staff and students and finance administration, ITS, human resources, really worked together to pull that off with a successful launch in January of this last year. That's certainly been a challenge, and it still is, because there are people that said, I used to be able to do this way, and now it's different. Some people say, boy, this is a lot more efficient than it used to be, but this is, again, one more thing on top of all the other challenges that we're dealing with. And then finally, the Great Resignation. We've sort of had a lot of people during COVID time reassess the workplace, reassess their career paths, what they're doing, their employer. This isn't just WSU or WSU Pullman. This is across industries. And when I get together with some of our donors, our corporate partners, with other folks, everybody's experiencing this. And it represents a challenge coming forward is how can we make sure that we still are a really attractive place to work, to go to school, to learn, to play, all of those things. And that's a challenge moving forward. So next slide, please. However, I'm really, really proud that Cougs do not back away from the challenges. I just want to acknowledge and thank all of you out there, faculty, staff, and students for being vaccinated, taking vaccines seriously. Over 90% of Cougs got the vaccine. And you know what that allowed us to do? In August of this last year, that allowed us to open back up to do in-person experiences in the classroom, athletic events, concerts, fine arts events, guest lectures, all those things that complement what we do in the classroom, we're able to do again. And that was because of our really high vaccination rate. So thank you very much for taking it so seriously. I also want to give a quick shout out to Human Resource Services and Cougar Health Services, because they had a lot of behind the scenes work to do on checking vaccine cards and making sure all that stuff was done in an appropriate fashion, abiding by what we needed to do in the state of Washington. I also continue to be just thrilled and connected by the ways that we found to be able to use some of these technology tools. I had a chance to, Noel and I, to go to several virtual alumni events during those COVID times. And it was fun to get together with folks, you know, down in Arizona. We were sitting in the president's house on the Pullman campus or those kind of things. And I found that Cougs wanted to get together, even if they couldn't get together physically. And people found creative ways to use technology to stay connected. And I think that part was really cool. On the flip side, one of the challenges that we also saw is I get used to being on a college campus and having really high bandwidth internet connectivity. And we found that when we went remote, that there was faculty, staff, and students that did not have that kind of high bandwidth connectivity. And so all the classes on Zoom or being able to access different things via the internet wasn't always convenient for all of our folks or even usable. So one of the things that we did that we're going to keep post-pandemic is a laptop loaner program, a hotspot program, and we want to make sure that we're doing those kind of things at all of our campus locations as appropriate to help ensure our students' success, to help ensure our faculty and staff also have the resources that they need. So when we talk about a remote work environment, it's not you just don't have to be in a physical office, it's you have the tools you need to be successful. So next slide, please. We also are researching and looking at the problems of today and finding innovative solutions for tomorrow. Really pleased that we had 5 of our colleagues this last year that were selected as fellows of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Professor Santu Bose, Tom Koala, Bern Marcus Lang, Jill McCluskey, and Katrina Mealy were all colleagues that were newly recognized members of AAAS. So congratulations to them. I also, once again, WSU was named as one of the top producers of Fulbright scholars in the United States. And that's something we want to particularly be proud of. And our research portfolio, even during the pandemic, continues to grow. And that's not because of anything I do as president or our chancellors do. That's because of our faculty, our staff, and our students coming up with creative, innovative ideas and taking those, submitting them in national, international competitions, and winning those particular awards and opportunities to do things. One of the challenges that we saw during COVID is we did a lot of COVID communications, whether it was town hall meetings or email notes or social media. It actually was ANDs. It was all of those things. Sometimes some of the things that were happening at the university kind of got washed away by the latest kind of COVID related things. And one of the things that I think is really significant this last year is we received the largest research grant in our history, $125 million grant from USAID. I just want to commend our faculty that were involved in putting that proposal together. It's got multiple institutions. It's really looking at detecting emerging viruses on a global scale. And those are the kinds of things that are continuing to occur even during the middle of all this COVID. We have a lot of other types of new opportunities coming our direction. There's a lot of interest in Washington, D.C. around hydrogen, and especially green hydrogen and a new, what we might term the hydrogen economy. I know WSU is interested in taking a leadership role in this. We've got several faculty and staff that are doing creative, wonderful work in this area now. I think you're going to see us continue to play a major leadership role in the hydrogen economy moving ahead, not just in the state of Washington, but the Pacific Northwest, the West Coast, and the nation at large. Next slide. One of the things I get to do, one of the best parts of my job is I get to go around the world, but certainly in the United States, and talk to Cougs and people touched by our institution. And when I say touched, what they are is they're touched by faculty and staff. If we're sitting talking to somebody about a major gift to name a building, to provide a scholarship, to do an endowed professorship or chair, to provide a discretionary fund to help our most needy students, whatever it is, to a person, they will go back and say, Professor X, this particular staff member touched me and made a big difference to my particular success when I was there. So I get to go and hear these great stories and take the best ideas from Washington State and put it in front of individuals that have the means and desire to support our institution. So far this year, we've raised somewhere over right at $100 million. We're on a record-setting pace in terms of philanthropic activity for WSU for our first year of our campaign. And this last year, our endowment reached over $675 million, our highest endowment level ever in our history. That's due to new gifts coming in, as well as some exceptional returns due to the stock market. Some recent gifts, though, I'd like to highlight 3 that came in that illustrate the breadth of some of what we're seeing. The first was an anonymous gift of the largest gift ever to our School of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences that launched our Rural Health Initiative. Now, PPS had been working in this space before, but what this gift did was took something that they wanted to do and finally provided some of the resources they needed to do it at the next level. The other thing, we have some of our corporate partners, BECU, put a program together out of the provost's office to really help earn, it's called a match savings program. And what this does is this helps some of our most needy students. And this continues to be the kind of thing that a lot of our corporate partners are interested in working with us on ways to help our students and meet their financial needs as they go through school. Finally, we got a recent gift from Joe Washburn of a little over $1 million supporting the Joe Washburn and Sue Durant Sport Management Scholarship in the College of Education. Many of you know Joe was a longtime WSU Pullman administrator, one of the chief architects of Title IX, which has had a national impact around not just intercollegiate athletics, but around universities and around our nation. These are the kinds of opportunities and gifts that we're going to continue to see coming in. And I can tell you we've got several major gift announcements to make in the next 4 to 6 weeks that will be truly transformational types of things for different academic units across campus. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we've seen around the country is a lot of places have had a lot of challenges with enrollment. And this is due to a variety of reasons, but a lot of it is economic. COVID-19 for some people who had a lot of assets during that 2-year period resulted in people having tremendous additional resources. We have a lot of folks that we serve in the state, a lot of our families that enroll at our Washington State campuses. COVID-19 has been very detrimental to them and their family. And so what's wound up happening is we're seeing a drop off in enrollment, and we are at a lot of places. Our community college system is seeing enrollment declines in some campuses in double-digit percentages each term. So what we're seeing is people are staying at home, they're taking jobs instead of taking that step and taking higher education. We also graduated our largest 2 classes in our history out of WSU Pullman. So we've got lots of people graduating, which is a good thing. And we've got smaller classes coming in during the COVID, and that's where some of our enrollment challenges have been. We were really fortunate about a year ago. Elizabeth hired Saichi Oba as a vice provost for enrollment management. Saichi and his team have brought some creativity and innovation to an already hardworking team, and we're just putting some new things in place. So one is the Common App. We're going to have a common application that people can use. We think this will really encourage and make it easier for people to apply to all of our campuses. The second thing is we have what's called the Cougar Quick Start program. We pioneered this in Vancouver. That's a collective we. Mel Netzhammer and his team working with Saichi put this together where you can do on-the-spot admissions to one of our campuses at a college campus fair. One of the other things that we find, and you all know this, our campuses sell themselves when families and prospective students are able to come to visit, to meet you all as faculty and staff, to see our facilities, to walk through, get a feeling for the place. And during COVID, we just weren't able to do that. So we had a sophomore and junior interest day and the Pullman campus as an example. Last year, we were able to do that was 2019. We just did that this last year. Over 1,500 people came to that. We're seeing these really record attendance at so many of those kind of events on all of our campuses. So I think there's room for optimism in terms of enrollment. I don't want anybody thinking it's going to be a V-shaped recovery, that all of a sudden fall of 2022 will be just like we were pre-pandemic. We think it'll take 2 years to recover our enrollment, and it's going to be important for us to continue to all work hard, bring people to campus and work as a team to make sure that Washington families and people in the Pacific Northwest view Washington State as a place that they can come, be supported, and be successful. So next slide, please. So let's look ahead a little bit. What are some things that we've got coming up on the horizon? First, we're going to have to be more flexible in our workplace. That's clear. The financial landscape and budget model, and I know we're going to talk about this in the Q&A, is another thing. We've got a 30-year patched together budget, and folks, it's not going to solve itself. Almost no problems do. We got to roll up our sleeves, and we'll certainly have an opportunity to talk about that. It's important that we provide you with adequate and appropriate compensation for the great work that you do. So we've got a lot of work to do on salaries, and we got some equity issues that need to be adjusted. We need to expand the mental health resources available to everybody. And this is going to require not just hiring more people, but use of technology. Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs at WSU Pullman, Ellen Taylor, is leading a lot of efforts around after-hours crisis counseling, peer networks, and using some tools to make sure that regardless of where people are in the system, they have 24-hour access to improved mental well-being resources. And I think we're going to have to continue to all work together on this as a whole. So last slide. So let me just say in closing that I really appreciate the positive attitude that so many members of our community have taken during COVID. I talk to other presidents at times, and I hear some of the challenges that they had to deal with at their own particular institution. And I know many of you, or some of you at times, sent emails or had verbal conversations or replied on social media around disagreement on maybe a tack that we took or a policy or the way that we did things. But I always felt people were respectful. They were thorough in what they did. And I think people were respectful when we made a decision to say, I may not agree with that, but if that's the way we're going to do it, then we got to move forward. So I appreciate your flexibility and resiliency. And I'm really looking forward to not just finishing this academic year, but really looking forward to what should be an exceptional year for WSU in fall of 2022. So with that, thank you for your time. I appreciate you being here, and I look forward to answering some questions.
Great, thank you. So I have the first question. I know that funding for pay increases was a top priority for WSU in the legislative session that concluded earlier this month. Were we successful in convincing the legislature to address the inadequate compensation for university employees?
Great. Thank you. That's an excellent question. And it was our #1 priority going into the legislative session, along with some programmatic requests that we also made. And so the short answer is yes, we were successful. And I want to express our appreciation to the legislature for investing in our people. A couple things, though, just to provide some level of detail. For our classified staff and those that are on, in particular, classified positions across the system, there will be a 3.25% raise on July 1, or that will go into effect based on, if somebody is on a particular bargaining contract, whenever that goes into particular place. For our other faculty and staff across the system, there's a formula that the state uses. And this was set during the last recession. And what that means is when the state says, okay, this is what your salary increase pool should look like, they provide a certain percentage of that. And they expect the university to make up the rest of that percentage over through tuition or other internal resources. This legislative session, one of the things that we were successful at doing was shifting that percentage so that now 65% of a raise comes from the state, 35% of the raise then has to become from internal university sources. So what we got from the state then is enough dollars to do at this particular point a 1.7% raise for all faculty and staff. And what we want to do now is put together some other resources internally within the university and provide a bigger package than the 1.7% for everybody. Now, you say, well, that's great, Kirk. I understand it. What's it going to be, and when am I going to know? A couple details. First, it will be a mass salary increase, so it'll be across the board for all employees. The second thing is we're looking right now. I talked to Stacy Pearson, our Vice President for Finance Administration, about this last night. We're going to be doing some modeling, and we will announce to the campus community by April 15th exactly what the salary increase will be for that mass salary increase and what date it will be effective on. We just need a couple weeks because what we want to do is now we know what the legislature did. We're modeling what our enrollment is going to look like. We have some one-time monies available. And what we want to do is map it out and make sure that we don't announce a raise and then 6 months from now go, well, we should have been more responsible on what we did. So I think we want to keep all those into account. And we recognize that with inflation and other types of stressors on families, that whatever we do won't be enough. But I think it's an important first step. The second part of this that I want to comment on is for the next legislative session, our number one priority is going to be moving that percentage, that 65-35 split, up further. Now, we appreciate the legislature did shift that this year after many years of not doing that. We want to keep doing that. So eventually we get to a place where 100% of a raise is legislatively funded and it's not necessarily tied to a tuition increase. So that's going to be out there and coming as well. And finally, I don't want anybody thinking that this is a one-time deal. We're going to do a salary increase now and then it'll be flat for a couple of years. We're already working with our legislative colleagues on the next major session starting in January of 23 on talking about a biennial salary package for all of our faculty and staff. So we're going to keep at that. The final thing I want to say about this is that there are some equity issues across the system. There's geographic equity issues, there's gender equity, and we've had several studies that have identified what those things are that you all have seen. Those are not new. But what we also have done is set some additional dollars aside from whatever that pool will be to start addressing some of those faculty salary equity issues in particular. And we're going to have more details again by the 15th on how that will be distributed, what it's going to look like, and things like that. So we know we need to do better. We are going to do better. And I am appreciative of the legislature for providing a base amount. Now it's up to the senior administration to work together to see what we can do to really provide the dollars that are so urgently needed by all of our faculty and staff.
President Schulz, thank you very much for that extensive answer. That's answers a lot of questions for us. So makes my faculty senate meeting a little easier. WSU's had some difficulty getting grant awards processed in a timely manner. What is the university doing to address this critical problem?
Yeah. Doug, thank you for the question. And I will not spend 20 minutes answering every single one, or we'll only get to 4 questions. But this was brought up at the beginning of the academic year by many of our faculty to say, hey, it's wonderful to get all these awards, but if it takes 3 to 4 months to get an account set up, we're just sitting dead in the water, not meeting our goals. So this was brought by the faculty to our attention. Stacy Pearson and her team worked with Chris Keene, and we did really 2 things, or 3. The first was we knew we needed to hire some additional people, and there were some salary issues there. So we certainly have filled some positions there. We want to make sure that's adequately staffed. The second thing that's harder to put a finger on, but was equally as important, was there were some old process challenges with that. The system we were using, they just had too many redundant steps. It took too many issues that really shouldn't have been in the middle of that had to be eliminated. So we also did some process improvements there. And third, we went out and got an external firm to provide some additional manpower to really take that from several months down to, I think now it's less than somewhere in the 3-week range. So one, we appreciate everybody bringing it forward. Second, it's something that we need to address and keep an eye on. And this is one of the positives of Workday. We can get really good data on that. We can monitor this. And if it starts creeping up again, we know that we've got some additional work that we need to do.
Wonderful, thank you. This next question is a tad long, so I will read it as quickly as possible, as it is important. Extension has built deep roots and trust in tribal and rural communities. The Morrill and Smith Lever Acts were mandated to address the rural and urban divide, which is a reminder for us to be land grant fierce. What, if anything, is being done to leverage and fund Extension as an admissions and recruitment arm or asset? Extension faculty, staff, and professionals are strong outreach experts that could impact enrollment.
Yeah, let me give a broad answer and then maybe a specific one. The first broad answer is that as we've done all these planning efforts over the last couple of years, it's interesting how often Extension comes up as a true opportunity for WSU. We take it for granted. I've worked at 4 land grant universities. It's all had Extension and research and faculty professionals all throughout the states. We kind of take it for granted. If you go to our colleagues at other institutions in the state or region, they're pretty envious of that presence in all those particular areas. However, extension professionals are just like everybody else at the university. There's less of them than there used to be. That means they've got more types of things to do, and they're very connected into those communities. So, one of the things I want to be careful of is that we don't keep adding on. It would be great to have our extension professionals working and helping and assisting with recruitment and those kind of things in their communities. But at some point, somebody comes back and says, okay, you just added another 10% on my workload. What am I going to give up to be able to do that? So until we can answer some of those questions, I just want to be really careful about dumping on additional expectations for individuals without their ability to pull something off. One of the things that we're doing from a leadership point of view as we structure our system is we develop a system leadership council to meet for the first time in next month. And one of the things that we've done is add several individuals onto that traditionally weren't what would be termed the president's cabinet. So for example, we're making sure that we have some leaders in diversity, equity, and inclusive excellence. We're elevating our Native American programs to serve on that particular group. And we're taking basically the director of extension and adding her onto that particular group as well, so that we're starting to have more people in the room when we have those particular meetings to think about how we can integrate more things better across the system.
Thank you, President Schulz. How will our experience with COVID-19 better equip WSU to respond to unanticipated disasters in the future?
Well, I think we learned a couple things. We learned lots of things, and I don't want to spend too long on this, but I think what we did initially was, sorry, I need to get some water. Too much talking. What we did initially when COVID-19 really started going up was we put in place a really complex set of committees and approval processes and things like this. And I remember when Elizabeth Chilton got here from outside the community, she asked why it was sort of set up in a particular way. And it wasn't being critical. It's just, man, there may be an easier way that's less time intensive to do some things. So I think at the end of it, this sounds silly, but one of the things that we really learned is we've got to let the subject matter experts that really understand what we should be doing, make sure that they're in charge of how we operate in these things. So people like Jason Sampson and others across our campus, the director of Cougar Health Services, they really had a good sense of where we need to go, and we need to make sure that those particular professionals are helping to lead our particular efforts. And we probably got a lot of top heavy in terms of VPs and presidents and chancellors on some of that early stuff. So one, we got to be more nimble, and we got to be quicker to bring in some of those subject matter experts. I think the other thing that we learned is that those rainy day funds and some of the fiscal restraint that we had exercised as an institution, that's really important to do, because everybody thinks a rainy day fund will never be used until all of a sudden you need it 3 times larger. And I think it just means that we've got to be increasingly fiscally responsible moving ahead to make sure that when we have whatever happens, that we have the ability to not do it and live paycheck to paycheck type of an operation as a university. The biggest thing, though, I think we learned is if you go back pre-pandemic, universities were seen as kind of stayed and stuck in their ways and couldn't change the way we did things because it wasn't different than it was in 1940 or 1950. I think it's remarkable to think that major public research universities generally pivoted in about 2 weeks from in-person research and in-person instruction to an online experience. And folks learned software that maybe didn't know it before, and they worked really, really hard to do a great job. And nobody kind of outside higher ed acknowledges the pivot and how quickly that happened. And for the most part, we did a really great job at that. So I think learning about that flexibility is really one of the key things. But subject matter experts, we got them. We don't have to go anywhere else to get them. They're right here for different things. Let's use them. Let's keep our structures much simpler and a little less convoluted and complicated. And then third, I think give ourselves some credit that we can make changes and we can shift much more rapidly than I think a lot of people would have thought we could have.
Thank you. Which offices do you see as being system-facing in the final iteration of OneWSU, particularly when it comes to advancing system-wide priorities and initiatives surrounding the student experience and student needs? And then which offices are currently system-facing now that will become campus-only within the next year or two?
Yeah, I think I appreciate the question. I just a couple things. We've made most of those decisions previously, and I don't sort of see any big shifts occurring in the next 18 months over what you see now. I think the important thing will be we've got a lot of dual roles right now because we didn't want to add additional highly compensated administrators at a time when we're undergoing some fiscal restraint. So one of the things I think, for example, it's going to be important. We've got some dual hat to have a research officer for the system, but an acknowledgement that there's a lot of research going on the Pullman flagship campus. So you're going to need that person that can serve as a chief research officer, both of the system and of the WSU Pullman campus. Chris Keene holds both those roles now and will, kind of moving forward. Intercollegiate athletics will report to the Pullman chancellor. And I think that, may feel to some people like a major change. Elizabeth and I and Pat have been working together on this, but certainly intercollegiate athletics is great for Cougs across the state. But when you really get down to it, most of our events occur in Pullman, and I think that's part of what we sell as a WSU Pullman experience is Greek life, residential life, strong research presence, intercollegiate athletics. All that's part of, I think, what makes our Pullman campus unique in our system. But I think some of it's going to evolve over time. And I think right now what I see happening is each campus has got different people with different responsibilities and student affairs and research and things like that. We want to just pull those groups together. There are already people there. Nobody has to go hire anybody, and just making sure we're coordinating across the system. So I don't see any big changes from where we are, kind of today. But 2 years from now, we may find that we don't need a person in a particular position when they retire, or that we're really missing some coordination that we need across the system. We need to hire somebody. But I think it's going to be a while before we do that. We got to kind of work it and see what works and see what doesn't before just starting to shuffle too many things around.
Thank you, President Schulz. Is WSU planning to divest its portfolio holdings of fossil fuel companies? And if so, when do you think that would occur?
Yeah, this is, Doug, this is something that has come up at most of the Regents meetings, and I know we have some faculty members interested in this. We have some student group interested in this in particular, and this is going on around the country. This is not unique to WSU Pullman. I went to a conference where we were talking about, it's a bunch of foundations, and we were talking about best practices. How do you decide where to invest in sort of environmental, social, governance, ESG is what is termed, areas on your endowment portfolio? And so we looked around, and some of the places that do a really nice job of this are places like Arizona State University within our own conference footprint. And when we talked to them, Oregon State as well has done some really nice work in this area. They said, what you've got to do, instead of saying, are we going to divest of a certain particular area in our portfolio, they said, what is the core principles that you have around your sustainability plan for the institution? And what has happened is we've got a lot of people across the system working in sustainability areas, recycling, we've got lots of stuff going. But if you say, what's the overall set of objectives? What do we want our carbon footprint to look like? Any of those things. I think there's pockets of people working on it that feel passionately about this, doing great work, but we don't necessarily have the coordination that we need to. So the first thing that we need to do is really put together a group of faculty, staff, and student colleagues to look at what does that sustainability plan need to look like for the system. I hope to have something done by January a year from now, and that would certainly be public and open out there. And then we're going to let that guide what types of things we ought to do with our investments. I would also remind, as we look at this and as we talk to other universities about this, one of the things, remember that we do a lot of work in biofuels and green fuels and things like that that are blended fuels. So when we look at complete divestment, I think one of the things that's important is also to remember some of the really interesting scholarly work that our colleagues are doing going on. And I want to make sure that we continue to be seen as a partner there. So bottom line is January, look for a plan. And I think that's going to help guide us moving forward. And we're having really good conversations internally, as well as with the foundation around this particular topic.
Thank you for that. What do you intend to do about the staffing shortages and extreme burnout that employees are experiencing across all departments?
Yeah, thank you. And I think almost everybody is probably facing some burnout. I know during the April timeframe in most academic years, that feels like, we've got 20 events every day. People are trying to finish up the semester, trying to get graduate students finished. It seems like this really frantic time. Now that's on top of people already feeling kind of burnt out because of less colleagues around them, COVID, all the other challenges associated with that. So there's a couple things. One, when we put out suggestions to the campus community around things like no Friday meetings, you have to send email at night, some small things like that. That's generally been well received, and as people practice and do some of that, it helps with that work-life balance. There's no question that we are operating virtually all areas of campus with less people, less faculty, less staff than we had 2 years ago, with the same set of things that we're trying to accomplish. And so I think there's a couple things. We've got to do a better job of training our leaders, administrators, supervisors to make sure that there's some flexibility built into what they do. Second, I think we've got to look at things like a no Friday meetings kind of thing, guidelines. How can we not just make a guideline? It's not a rule, but how can we help people as they plan out the fall semester, maybe plan Zoom meetings for a little less time, do some things to help that work-life balance. And then as we recover our enrollment, and as we have more students, that means we're going to need more faculty and staff. I want us to be really selective and careful about how we hire and where we hire back into to make sure that we're meeting the most critical needs. When I talk to other presidents and chancellors, when I talk to presidents and people leading different organizations, nobody's got this figured out. And I think it's flexibility in the workplace, it's managing those expectations and things like that. But I think all I can do is try and set the tone, set an example, work to get more resources so we can get more colleagues, and then make sure that we don't return back to some work habits that perhaps were not healthy for the work-life balance for any of our employees pre-pandemic.
Thank you for that. Thinking about new employees, how will WSU work to not only hire new faculty of color, but also and especially to retain them?
Yeah, I think this is an area that I think WSU has struggled, and I've worked at several land-grant universities located in rural communities, and it's been a struggle everywhere I've been. And many of you, and some of you watching this, may have spent a career at Washington State University working on this very topic. So there's been lots of work that's gone into this, but we needed to try some new things that maybe we hadn't done before or had not done in some period of time. So when Elizabeth was interviewing for provost, she mentioned a cluster hiring initiative that she'd been part of at her last 2 institutions. And she said, hey, I would like to do this when I got to WSU. And so I think that started this last year, and it was so successful. We brought in 5 fantastic colleagues, and we're already doing searches for 5 additional colleagues in a different area this year. We're already going to putting out proposals that were due from various units and departments across WSU system. I think we're due today in the provost's office to that next iteration. So it's not just hiring people into some of these areas in diversity, equity, inclusive excellence, but it's also making sure that we're setting up a mentoring network to help support these new scholars as they come and be part of our community. And that doesn't mean that that network has to be only at one geographic location. It's got to be at other places as well. Is this a perfect solution? Absolutely not, but it's one positive step forward that I think that we're taking to complement the work that others are doing. There'll be other ideas out there. Folks that are listening to this today or watching this may say, well, here's an idea I saw at another institution that I think WSU ought to look at. And we always want to hear what those things are, because this is not something we check a box off and say we're done. This is always going to be a challenge for us, is how do we hire and have a really diverse faculty at all of our locations. We have different challenges in the urban centers and our rural locations, but everywhere our students deserve to see faculty from all walks of life, staff from all walks of life, and this is something that this is, I think, a piece of what we're doing to make that better.
Thank you. Data, metrics, and analytics are the path to efficiency as WSU struggles to escape the siloing of information across the system. Do you have any plans to work with your leadership team to establish institutional data policies, standards, and practices as we face the challenges ahead of us?
Yeah, you know, telling a chemical engineer that using data to make decisions is a good way to operate, you know, is kind of a natural place to be in. And what I want us to be, I joke about that, is I worked for a dean one time when I was a department head, and he made decisions with spreadsheets. And what we want to do is we want to use data to inform us making decisions. We don't necessarily want data to force us on what decisions that we're going to make. And that's a subtle difference, but I think it's really important. Many of you may remember that Chris Hoyt is our first ever vice president for strategy planning and analysis, and that was to recognize some of this particular area. She's working closely with Sashi Pillay with ITS and Fran Hermanson and institutional research about how can we make this more seamless? How can we get data and information to people to help them with decision making in a much more timely fashion that's also accurate and it's transparent. Recently, we contracted and now have academic analytics as part of our toolbox of things that we can use. And there's been multiple presentations given to different groups around campus, including the Faculty Senate. And I think this is, again, another set of tools and data and information that can assist us in making the right decisions moving forward. This is going to be a bigger issue moving forward than less of an issue, I think. And our faculty and staff and leaders ought to expect that they've got the same sort of data environment to operate in, just like they would have at the University of Washington or any of our aspirational peers. It's a journey. People want to be protective of certain data or a certain way of doing things, and sometimes for very good reason. So what we want to do is just continue to make progress in this particular space, be transparent, open with it, make sure people understand it. And I think 2 years from now, I feel pretty confident that we're going to be in a much better spot than we are today.
Thank you for that, President Schulz. We've only got about 5 minutes left. I can ask you another question, or if you'd like to have time for a closing statement.
Go ahead. Let's do another question.
Another question? Okay, so the next one on the list is, why are we loaning money from the general government fund to athletics for a new baseball field? Isn't athletics self-sustainable?
So the new baseball complex was raised with private funds, and all new facilities projects for intercollegiate athletics have to be 100% funded from donor funds. And I think we started that when I came in as president, when I hired Pat Chun, talked about that in particular. However, when you build a facility, you need the money up front to actually, construct the facility, pay the bills. A lot of times donor dollars come in over a 5-year pledge period. So what that means is a lot of times there has to be a short-term bridging loan to make sure that the cash is there up front, and then that is repaid off those donor dollars and those pledges. Now people could say, well, what about if somebody doesn't pay their pledge? Virtually 100% of WSU pledges are paid. It may be 99%, but it's right up there in that particular number. So this is not something that's new to me. It's been that way for 30 years here. So you have great confidence that those dollars are going to kind of come in. But that's what happens is Stacy and her team, instead of going to an outside vendor to borrow money, elected to do it internally, and that's being repaid as those dollars come in on those 5-year pledges for baseball. So I just want to continue to be clear that privately funded facilities for intercollegiate athletics, there's no state money that goes into that. We're not sort of doing any bait and switch. It's all donor dollars, and that's the way it's going to have to operate. And that's healthy for us moving forward as an institution. So I do think we're kind of at the end of our time. So let me take this opportunity to Doug and Anna, thank you for the questions. And there's several other questions that were here. And what we'll do is the same thing that I've done in the past is we'll provide some written answers and send those back to both APAC and the Faculty Senate on some of the other questions I didn't get to. We'll post those out there too. That's not meant to be secret. Thank you for our faculty, staff, and students and the great job that you've done under really, really challenging and difficult circumstances during COVID. I'm really proud of kind of where we are. I'm proud of the fact that we were in person this year. I was going through Taco Bell in Pullman at the beginning of fall semester, and I was getting my tacos in my car, and it was one of our students there that was handing them to me, and he said, "Thank you for bringing us back." He said, "I appreciated everything people did on Zoom, but it's not the same as being back and interacting with faculty face-to-face, interacting with my colleagues face-to-face, and being here in person. Thank you for our faculty and staff for taking that extra effort to make sure that we could be in person and really meet where our students need to be." So folks, thank you. And as always, go Cougs.